Great, grateful recovered alcoholic. Great. Glad to know I'm not the only one that's nervous. Anybody hear that? That's my heartbeat. All right. First of all, it's an honor to be up here, and I'm very thankful for this opportunity to come up here, share a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope with you guys. A little bit about me. My sobriety date is May 20th, 2023. Just shy of 2 years. Mind at this point. I'm going to keep it simple. What it was like, what happened, what it's like now. Before I get going, one of the ways I like to kind of warm up is just to gauge my crowd. If y'all don't mind, bear with me. Is anybody here that came to AA one time, stuck and stayed sober? Awesome. Awesome. For the rest of us. So what that tells me is that there's hope, that this can be the last time, right? I'm going to get it a little out of order just to kind of set some context. I first stepped foot in AA somewhere around 2016, and like I said, almost 2 years now, so that math doesn't math. If I had stuck and stayed, would have had a little bit more than almost 2 years. So at some point in this, I'm going to share my experience for me, what absolutely did not work when it came to Alcoholics Anonymous in this program that has changed so many people's lives and definitely changed mine. So thinking back, I used to not really go into much depth for early childhood. I believe that trauma definitely can exaggerate the way that I tend to act in untreated alcoholism, but I don't believe today that has anything to do with being an alcoholic. As best as I can tell from what I've read, even though there's different sides to the beliefs, I believe it's genetic. It's definitely in my family, although the people that I know in my bloodline are not actively in AA. So I will say, looking back over my life, I can see manifestations of that restless, irritable, and discontent in all kinds of ways, kind of like the last guy was sharing. My story consists of a lot of alcohol and drugs. Out of respect for this being an AA meeting, I'm going to keep it kind of to a dry goods, outside issues, things like that. Bear with me if I make that mistake. Some of the meetings I speak at, it's a little looser on that. So I'll try to show respect to where I'm at, guys. So a little bit about my beginning. I came from a very, very, very broken bloodline. I never met my biological father. In fact, not many people are sure exactly who that is. I did meet my biological mother eventually. I think I was 23 years old when I met her for the first time that I can remember. So I am the youngest of 3 boys. We encountered all kinds of physical, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse pretty much from the time that we came into this world. I'm fortunate I don't have memories of that, although my entire life I have tried to make up for this overwhelming urge of not being good enough. I had to overperform out of fear of, if I don't act just right, perhaps I might get casted aside in a place. So that definitely showed up in a lot of the ways that I acted later through life. I have found a lot of healing through that. A lot of it due to the relationship I now have with God, made possible by the steps in this program, in the direction of good sponsorship and the love of a lot of people in this program. So around 22 months old, I was adopted into the Picture Perfect family. My dad's a retired state trooper. He was a drill instructor in the Air Force back in Vietnam. He was just that guy, the guy that everything he touches turns to gold, good, solid Christian guy, not holier than thou, but a righteous man. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. They actually met. She was a secretary at the headquarters for the Georgia State Patrol, and he was an up-and-coming prominent state trooper. So it was neither of their first marriages, and at that point they couldn't conceive. So I came into the picture. I used to struggle with that a lot. People would pick on me for being adopted. They're like, oh, those are not your real parents. To which I replied, I was handpicked. Yeah. You might have an accident. So, that being said, a lot of the fear and shame that I projected onto them, that have they not intervened in my life, if God not intervened through them in my life, there's no telling. I almost am not alive today to stand up here, just from the way that I drank and I used drugs. So I can't imagine had I not had that powerful redirecting force in my life. So, good kid, but as far back as I can remember, extremely shy, extremely concerned with how other people thought of me. Talented guy, pretty smart enough to get good grades. Also went to a private Christian school. I was actually valedictorian. Out of 8 people. So, grew up in rural Georgia, a little place called Cedartown. A few famous people came from there. The original voice of Winnie the Pooh. Sterling Holloway, Big Chubb, if anybody likes bulldogs. There we go.
Go around.
Let's see. There was a country music singer. Oh, that's not really that important. But yeah, I was a misfit, misunderstood. I will say I was fortunate to have a very strong relationship for a young man with a God of my own understanding. My parents were beautiful examples of that. But, you know, church is filled with a lot of broken people, just like AA, just like any other place. And so there were points, my family was pretty prominent in the church, so I watched the rise and fall of a lot of churches. And I believe that my alcoholism manifested in a lot of different ways. And at times it manifested more strongly in alcohol, at times drugs, at times addictions to pornography, at times to a lot of different things that were extremely destructive, and that I swore to myself that I would stop and I would never do it again. And I watched myself the same day, same hour, same week, whatever, repeat those patterns. And I say that to say that at 9 years old, I was exposed to pornography for the first time by the pastor's son behind the church that we were attending. So, you know, I've worked through that by realizing that we're humans, man. And so often, you know, progress, not perfection. We're aiming towards a goal and we fall short. So I try not to throw the baby out with the bathwater today, and learn from anybody, whether it's how I want to be, how I don't want to be, whatever it is. So that was probably my first introduction to becoming aware of I was different in the sense of I was actively engaging in things that I knew I shouldn't have been, that hurt my relationship with God and others, and led to me doing other things that I didn't want to do, even when I felt guilty about it and I desperately wanted to stop. And it's ironic because it led to me stealing from my family. Out of my grandmother's purse as she was dying of cancer, being carted back and forth to the hospital, to take those porn magazines and go hold up in an abandoned house, you know. So for me, I see a little correlation in behavior there. So at that point, a real schism developed in my life where it's like the man I wanted to be, the man I believed I could be, the man that a lot of people believed I could be, and the man that I was being behind closed doors. And so, you know, I learned to wear this mask, and I drifted further and further away from spirituality due to shame. Eventually became very agnostic, tried to be atheist, couldn't really settle with that. But for the most part, on the outside, I was a very good kid. Like I said, valedictorian. Out of 8. Somehow the prom queen, too. That was weird. I'm kidding. I didn't go to prom. So, fast forward, I graduate. Ideas of going to college. Started dating some people I definitely should have. Really tore up my relationship with my family over the choices I was making early in those relationships. Got real aimless and basically destroyed my college career. Exited with a 1.7 GPA. You know, and so my dad kind of stepped in. He said, "Hey, son, you know, I'm pretty sure you get a job as a dispatcher for the state patrol. It's a state job. Pays okay, you have good benefits. Maybe it'll help you straighten up." So I didn't really want to, but I decided to do that, and I did that for 2 years, 9 days. Shows you how much I love that job. You know, but in there, I remember a trooper basically coming up to me and telling me, "Sproul, by the time that I'm done with you, you're going to be cussing and dipping and drinking and so on and so forth." And although I don't blame him, he was spot on the nail in a very, very short time. For me, it was 2 weeks before I was 21. I was definitely dipping and smoking and cussing before then. But 2 weeks before my 21st birthday, a super straight-laced Christian, wholesome guy from a small town was like, "Well, I know what I'm going to do on my 21st, so let's taste a beer and see how this goes." 21st birthday, got alcohol poisoning. And proceeded to almost get alcohol poisoning probably for the first 6 months. It took me a long time to realize how to drink, under some kind of sense of control. But for a long time, I could take it or leave it. My alcoholism had progressed to the point where I believe I crossed that line into true powerlessness, at least not with alcohol. And so, mind you, the porn addiction was ongoing from 9 years old till probably 6 months ago for me. The alcohol thing, I could take or leave. Eventually, the opportunity to become a state trooper presented itself. Again, didn't necessarily want to be one, but I knew it was a good opportunity. Always wanted to be the guy that could make a difference in people's lives, maybe save somebody, since I couldn't save myself. And that's what I did. In 2011, I went in for roughly 8 months to a hellacious experience, basically boot camp. And I came out, made history, youngest person, and the first person ever to go directly from training to the DUI task force. So, yeah, irony, huh? So I go to the DUI task force, working permanent midnights for a while in Atlanta, Georgia, which, it's a dirty city, and a lot of chaos there. So definitely saw a lot of stuff. Had a law enforcement friend die. Responded to a lot of really tragic stuff. Worked 154 crashes in like 2.5, 3 months. Saw a lot of death. Realized it wasn't a state patrol that my dad wasn't part of. A lot of it had changed, and I began to question, was I really making a difference? That came in particular when I saw a man that had, long story short, I took a person to jail that was drunk. I come back, I see a pedestrian that I thought was struck by a car, being drugged out of the street. I start rendering aid to that person, and I get the call that a murder suspect was going south on 75 from Tennessee. So get that person in the ambulance, jump in my Crown Vic with like 1/8 of a tank of gas, and start heading north. And it was crazy. There was probably 100 police officers there on the scene when the guy finally put the 45 to his temple. And the story was, he shot his wife, called the police on himself, said, "Come get me." So we roll up to that scene. My dad was prominent in state patrol. They said, "Sproul." They wanted me to fill my dad's shoes. Go look and see what a piece of what looks like. Look at this animal who was a coward, this and that. And when I got there and I looked at this man who was still drawing breath, I realized that it was none of those things that he'd been labeled with. It was a human being, that at one point had a family, at one point, probably a job, whatever. But he encountered something that was bigger than him and his ability to make sound, reasonable choices. And if in fact he was created in the image of God, that was a travesty. So at that point, I was beginning to be disillusioned. Shortly after that, I wound up getting a girl pregnant. Never should have been dating in the first place. So going back to my early childhood experience, it was my goal never to bring a child into this world that would grow up without mom and dad at home, right? As a healthy family. I go on to repeat that pattern with 2 children. The first, we find out 2 weeks before she's born, not knowing if she's mine or not, having questions there. We find out that she has a life-threatening heart condition and would need immediate heart surgery if she was to survive. So she's born, rushed to the Children's Health Care of Atlanta, and for 2.5 months she fights for her life. Not making it a couple of times, life support, just all kinds of stuff. At that point, I really experienced my first dose of mental health. severe depression. I went from a in-shape 200-ish pound guy down to about $145. Stopped eating, stopped sleeping, super depressed, super suicidal. Started having panic attacks. Didn't know what those were at the time, but later I learned. So I kind of give up at this point. The relationship with her mom was very toxic. I did begin drinking to kind of get me outside of that state. Not yet really realizing what I was doing. But at that point, I could still take it or leave it. What I was doing around that time was I had to go back to work. I ran out of paternal leave. And I began patrolling the worst places I could find in hopes that something would happen. And instead of me dying in my own hands and causing a lot of grief for other people, life would just take me out. And I could no longer suffer the way that I was suffering. So eventually I decided to quit. They write me a big severance check, and that's when it's off to the races. I had friends that were definitely what we might call kind of hippie-minded, and claimed that those ways were really good for treating mental health. So the day that I hung up my uniform was the day that I tried that for the first time. And I had what a lot of people describe as that faux spiritual experience. That sense of ease and comfort that comes at once after taking a few drinks, where this is how I'm supposed to feel. Oh, this was what was wrong with me all this time. And this is my medicine. And so if that worked, then maybe some other stuff will work. And over the next, 2013 to 2023, I tried anything and everything I could possibly put in my body. I went from a valedictorian, pretty good Christian guy, state trooper, to a multiple-time felon, homeless in the streets, sleeping in clothing donation boxes when it's too cold outside in Georgia. And looking back on it, man, I drank alcoholically, even though at times I could take it or leave it. There's plenty of memories of puking blood, thinking I didn't have Jaeger, only to realize it was blood. Or, swearing that I was only going to have 2 that night and then having no control of how much I was going to drink, or going to the ATM once or twice, 6, 7 times, 8 times, overdraft, pawing on things. There was a time where I would have tried to trade these shoes to get right, so there's plenty of war stories there. There's plenty of things from the outside looking in. Like I had a friend who did all these things and I only did a couple. He went to treatment, came back, and he said the most true thing he possibly could have to me at that time, Greg, you're an alcoholic. Nah, dude, you're the alcoholic. Lo and behold, But I'm thankful that I got here when I got here. And I used to regret for the ones coming back or the ones that are just starting over or have a few days under your belt, trying to get your first year, your second year, or whatever. I realize that we all have a place here because at some point we're going to encounter somebody on a very similar journey that needs to know there's hope. And had I not encountered a lot of people that showed me a lot of grace and pounded this in my head until it finally started sinking in, I wouldn't be here today. So fast forward in and out of jail, on and off the streets, charges, almost going to prison. Whew, I'm glad I didn't go to prison as a former cop. That was not scary, by the way. That was real scary, keeping that secret. On and off, everything. Promising this, promising that, new jobs, changing all the outside circumstances, thinking that was going to change this somehow. I crashed and burned over and over and over. Got introduced into AA in 2016 for the first time. I think it was 2019 before I really started remembering anything. Obviously, it wasn't a very short-term detox. Went to the meetings because they make you. Thought it was about meeting new people, making friends, and all that. Fixed me, but didn't turn out to be true. So in 2019, I had somebody pull an intervention that happened to work at one of those detoxes. And it was an act of providence. I had ghosted my probation office. I had one more anger management class to complete. I was going to basically be put on non-report. It was around Thanksgiving that year, and instead I got an argument with my family and went MIA for 4 days, and halfway across the state. And so at some point I wind back up in a house that I shouldn't be in, doing things I definitely shouldn't have been doing, contemplating throwing myself on the mercy of my probation officer, and just admitting everything. And instead, what happened was a knock at the door and a familiar face, and it turned out to be this lady, Tabitha, that worked at this resource center. And she said, "Greg, will you come with me to treatment?" And at that point, I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." And so I went to that treatment center. I started getting exposed to AA. I started beginning to have an open mind. And I, for some reason, started realizing that it was more than going to meetings. It's a 12-step program. It might have something to do with taking some steps. You know, but what I found is it's not a one-and-done thing. It's something that's ongoing. When I said I'm a recovered alcoholic, I mean what the book talks about in the beginning when it says we are more than 100 people who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And years later, it began to sink in that the alcohol and the drugs were secondary. The choices I was making surrounding that was secondary, but at the root of my troubles was this selfishness and self-centeredness. This preoccupation with Greg, what Greg wants, with how Greg feels, what he needs to feel right. And some later described that as God-sized hole that I spent my life trying to put everything else in to fill, but inevitably never could. So, in and out of treatment, in and out of the streets, around the same mountain over and over, until eventually I go to a very heavy AA-centered recovery program that forced me to work with steps with a sponsor, and I got 9 months for the first time. But like the book talks about, resentment is the number one offender. I wanted to also go to church, and that had been abused by a lot of people, so that wasn't an option available at that particular place. So I thought I knew better, got real resentful, and made plans to come down to Florida for the first time. Come down here to Real Recovery. I saw somebody with a hat. Yeah. So had all that lined up, and a week before I'm supposed to leave, they said, "Hey, Greg, you signed up for 12 months. This ain't a hotel. Get out." So I got very mad. Very, very mad. And I nursed that. Luckily, from a job I had somewhere to stay until I transitioned. But I sat on that. I festered. I didn't use what this program taught me to deal with resentment. I think I was somewhere around maybe my 6th or 7th step at that point. And the obsession came back, and I wound up picking up again. Came down here, determined to do things a little bit different, began working the steps again, got involved in AA down here, kind of started to coast. Got less serious about doing this to the best of my ability. Got about the same place in the steps, started having issues with the meetings, wasn't the ones I liked, the people didn't share what I liked, not knowing that that selfishness and self-centeredness could grow and creep back in, sit in my butt in one of these seats in here. And so somebody put it like this: AA is not a self-help program, Greg, it's a help others program. And you'll learn if you keep going through the steps that there's a point around 8 and 9 where it says up until this point, we've been trying to put our lives in order. But our real purpose is to be of maximum service to God and others. And for me, over and over and over and over, I remain in the mindset of what is AA? What are y'all going to do to help me get my life back? To help me get over this shame, to get the things that I've missed out on all this time. And if you didn't do that, then, so long. And eventually I compared myself out of AA. Started looking at the differences, started thinking it was all about me. And another way that I heard that put is we all worship something. For this alcoholic, most of my life I worship myself and my feelings. So I got what I got, took some trips around the mountain again, in and out of the streets, in and out of a bunch of different sober livings, until I got to a point in 2023 where I was still holding a job, I was renting a room somewhere, I had a bicycle. I was paying child support. I was doing some things here and there, but I was miserable. And I dipped my toe in AA a little bit here and there and decided the California sober was the method that would fix everything. I'd do them both. And I quickly realized that that didn't work for me. And eventually, like so many people swear it will never do for them, it put me in the right place at the right time. The people had the right things. And I watched myself, even though I swore I never would, go right back to them. And after 4 months of binges, it started out Friday, Saturday, turned into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And it got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I remember towards the end, drinking and drinking, crying myself to sleep, like praying that my heart would stop, praying anything, knowing from being exposed to AA enough that the answer was there. So I went back to AA for a meeting a week. I got a sponsor, didn't work any steps. Figured it was the mental health, figured it was the job I hated, figured it was the crappy living situation. And so I remember going to a Thursday men's meeting, had a sponsor, check, went to an AA meeting, check, had a doctor's appointment scheduled to talk about my depression, check, and then anxiety. And some of the guys in the meeting said they might know a sober roommate. So I was like, perfect, all this is going to work out. I go to the doctor the next morning, we talk about it, we set up a treatment plan, there's hope, and as Greg pedals his bicycle out of the parking garage, that thought clicks in your head. Hey, it's Friday, you just got paid today. And the thought, hey, I should call my sponsor came in my mind. Hey, wait, it's about noon, and there's a noon meeting starting about 3 blocks that way, you should probably go over there. Man, think of what you'll do, you swore you'd never do this again. And I battled myself all the way through. And I watched myself, and it became crystal clear for me at that point that I had no choice. I thought I did. I lied to myself. But it was the closest thing to like some, exorcist movie of demon possession I could possibly describe. It's like equally loud voices saying no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And knowing deep down in my pit, or the pit of my soul, that I was going to do it. And couldn't believe I did it. So I get to that point after the fact. I pick up the phone the next day and I call my sponsor. Before then, I swore I wasn't going to go to my 9th sober living. I didn't want to go to AA that much. I'd worked the steps before, all the way through. Never sponsored anybody. I served a lot of coffee. I shook a lot of hands, so I was of service. But I had all these conditions. I was still running the show in so many ways, man. I hadn't surrendered. But I got to that point where, like the book talks about, that jumping off point, that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, where no matter how much I tried to fool anybody else, and believe me, I was not fooling anybody else, my life was unmanageable. Sure, I had a job. Sure, I was off probation since 2019 or something like that. Sure, I had a bicycle. Sure, I had a roof over my head. I wasn't homeless this time. But I was not okay. And one way or another, eventually my choices brought me right back to the same place, where I was putting drugs and alcohol in my body, no matter what happened to me in the past, no matter how many good reasons not to. And I realized I didn't have the power to stop this, and it was time to surrender. So I reached out to the guy that had offered to sponsor me, and showed him a lot of grace. And I said, Connor, dude, help. I don't know what to do. I've heard enough of your story. I know you were in places like I'm in. Do you have something at all? This man wasn't a year sober. Neither was Bill W. when he carried this message to Dr. Bob either. What this man had was freedom that wasn't based on time. It was based on the connection with a power greater than himself or any other human. And I wanted and I desperately needed that. And so I got to the point that I believe is crucial for us real alcoholics, where you say, okay, you tell me how you got there, and I'll do what you did to the best of my ability. It may not look good. You show me, I'll give it everything I got. And 2.5 months, this man gave me everything that he was showing. He took me through these steps. And somewhere between steps 2 and 10, I think it was somewhere around my 5th step, that obsession lifted. That obsession Because before I could stop, but I couldn't stay stopped, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And maybe it was an alcoholic, maybe it was situational, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. And it's like I got tighter and tighter and tighter over time the longer I was separated from drugs and alcohol. Until eventually I exploded and I ran back to what I thought was the cure for all this misery. And I can honestly say that since then, I've encountered some of the hardest situations I've been through in my adult life, from a new relationship and marriage, to dealing with a son that's out of state that I barely get to see, and the relationship with his mother, to 3 months out of work because I herniated a disc and lost a career, to the workers' comp case getting denied, to sickness after sickness after sickness, financial security to insecurity. I've been through so many things outside of homelessness. I've had friends die, I've had family die. All the things that in the past were like the most natural scenario for me to pick up a drink. But not once has that obsession returned. You know, and that's beautiful because it promises me in this book, and it promises any of you, that by step 10, sanity will have returned. The caveat for me was what we read and how it works. Half measures avail us nothing. I think half measures give you 50%. You know, and you know what? It makes sense. But it's really a do or don't do type thing for me today in this spirituality. My current sponsor makes it so simple. He's like, Greg, you know, if you're diabetic and you're insulin dependent, your blood sugar would not stay maintained off of yesterday or the day before's insulin that you took. So each day you get up, you take your insulin, you monitor your diet, you do some healthy exercise, and you stay well. You're not cured, but it can go into a state of almost remission where you're not a slave to that and you can live a normal life. And that's been my experience. So I'm feeling kind of rambly. How much time have we got? What time are we done?
When you're done. 10 after.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go over the steps as they were shown to me, because the thing that was huge for me is having a realization that this wasn't just about Greg getting well. And what was significantly noticeably different for me this time when I went through the steps, obviously doing it to the best of my ability, even though that looked like to do a lot of times, was somewhere the seeds on hand that I was going to get well and do everything I could to help other people get well. So that sponsoring thing, that carrying the message to other alcoholics was of primary importance for the first real time in my life. So I got through the steps, or to step 12, I still served coffee and shook hands and stuff like that. But even on a bicycle, I went everywhere I could possibly go to meetings and tried to carry this message to alcoholics who still suffer. You know, and I tried my best to practice these principles in all my affairs. And what I realized that in the crash course triage saving Greg's life, like 2.5 months of working the steps, there was a lot that I'd forgotten. And I struggled very hard to fairly carry this message. And so at that point, I met a man who absolutely had what I wanted, an incredible journey in sobriety, wonderful working knowledge of this book and how to carry people through it. And I asked him to take me back through the steps. And 2.5 more months, I was through the steps again, and very well equipped to carry this message, you know? And so, number one, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives become unmanageable. I was taught that alcohol, right, that's just a name for the problem. There's tons of 12-step programs out there, but I've come to learn that my problem manifests not just in alcohol, but in all kinds of things. And so I try not to get hung up on that, because I did a lot of hard substances too, and I used to be like an alcohol addict, which I later learned is kind of like saying in a room full of dogs, hey, I'm a German Shepherd dog. Same full grown. And so my lives have become unmanageable, right? And I had a mental and physical aspect of this powerlessness. You know, when I put it in my body, I don't react like normal people. I crave more. And I cannot guarantee you how much I'm going to take. Maybe once in a while I drink too. But a lot of times I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink and I burn the world down. That unmanageability part, man, that's huge for me, because I had a job at times. But on the inside, I was miserable and I was dying. On the outside, all my best choices got me back to drugs and alcohol. You know, I came to believe the power greater than myself to restore me to sanity. At first, my higher power was people in this room that stayed sober. And later, I was directed to the book where it says, at certain times, the alcoholic has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human power can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And so I came to realize, for me, that's God. For a lot of people, it's God. Don't get hung up like I used to on that God. I used to hate the God that I thought I knew for this and for that. And I realized that my understanding was flawed. And more was revealed over time as I grew. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him, which I later learned was kind of like this contract, that where I come to God and I say, God, relieve me of this bondage of self. Do these things for me so that I can do these things for you. And part of that, and one of the most important parts for me today, is bearing witness to those I could help, letting them see that it's possible, even for someone like me. You know, and I do that by staying connected to newcomers, by checking out my next steps, and so on and so forth, by speaking even though I get nervous and I care what y'all think. Step 4, boy, I thought I did a thorough 4-step the first time. Maybe 30 resentments. This last time I had almost 400. It was quite a lot. Over 100 character defects, made painfully clear in that 4th and 5th step. The way we do it, it's like the book says right there after 5, we go spend an hour alone with God, thinking over the work we've done up to this point, see if there's anything omitted. And then I went to God and I asked Him to remove those defects, remove those fears, remove the things that are standing in my way of usefulness to other people, right? And after that hour of spending that time with God, I can only describe it as what the book says, a nearness to my Creator, a sense of peace. And I remember feeling like the Greg that I once really loved in life. And I hadn't felt that way in years. And so, went on to 8, minimum of 3 minutes a week, 8, 9. 10, this was game changing for me because I always did it at night, kind of a review, more like 11th step. But for me, there's so many things in my life that get me disturbed. And step 10 simplifies it so easily for me. Instead of going and looking for all the character defects, which I saw out of my 4th and 5th step, I was taught that there's 4 cardinal defects, right? That I can trace any other character defect back to. That resentment, selfishness, self-centeredness, dishonesty, or fear. And when they crop up, I go to God immediately. Then I go to another alcoholic at once. And then, as fast as humanly possible, I turn my attention to helping others. A simple way that we do that in our sponsorship family is we get newcomers' numbers. And we develop a relationship, and we check on them, and we ask how they're doing and how we can help. That's led to me being able to sponsor other people, who now sponsors other people. And so, step 10, 11, I look over my day. I get up in the morning. I ask God to direct my thinking, let it be divorced of selfishness, self-seeking motives, resentment, fear, all that. I pray for people that I may be resentful for, and I go about my day. And at the end, I check and see how I did. And I get to go to a loving God today, and I get to ask Him for forgiveness and direction of how to be better. And it happens. And the more that I do this, the more that I spiritually grow. And I found that the less that I do this, the more that I'm settling for a lower level of happiness and peace and closeness with my Maker. And eventually I begin that slow step away from AA and from that health that it brought me. And most importantly, this has kept me together when some of those most difficult situations were kicking my butt. I honestly say, I work in a lot of the areas I used to live out of my car and go into the bathrooms to shower and do other things. I get to go in there today and look at that and barely recognize the man that I am today. And it is an honor that coming from the Greg that if I had caught other people living the way he was living, treating people the way he was treated, I would have done my best to kill him. But to get to be of service to other people and say, like the 9-step promises, no matter how far down the scale you've gone, you will see how your experience can benefit others. And it's been my joy and my honor to watch people's life change as they've come to know their higher power. and gain freedom like so many of us have. I guess that's it. Love y'all.